Thank you, Nancy. And at this time, if you would like to be dismissed for children's church, we're dismissing children's churchable kids at this time. So I wouldn't normally go to the story of Elijah for a Mother's Day message, right? And you'd go to Proverbs chapter 31 or one of those other places, the testimony of Timothy's mother. All those are really great texts, and perhaps we'll do those another time. But as I was looking at kind of the next story in our journey through Elijah's stories here in 1 Kings, I found a story of a man who was assigned a task by God that could only be done with God's help. I thought, wait a minute, that's being a mom. It's a task assigned by God that can only be done with God's help. And so I decided that moms today, you and I, were going to look at the next story in Elijah's experience. It's in 1 Kings chapter 18, 1 to 15. 1 Kings 18. And I always come to Mother's Day, and I always tell the same Mother's Day joke. Maybe you all remember it by now. It's the story of my favorite Mother's Day card. And this mom gets this card, and it's all full of the little handprints and smudges and all that kind of stuff. And it's on the front, it says, "Mom, dear Mom, on this Mother's Day, I remember that little prayer you used to always pray for me." And it opens up and it says, "God help you if you ever do that again." Right? We need God's help. Right? That's what parenting is all about. That's what being a mom is all about. And so I thought I'd read you kind of a story that I got online, about the next Survivor series, right? And so I'm going to read it as it's written, and so if it's just a little bit, too funny for you or too edgy for you, you have to forgive me. I'm just reading what came on my phone. So 6 married men will be, that's the next Survivor series, right? The Survivor series are all over different kinds of Survivor things. Here's the story, this next Survivor series. 6 married men will be dropped on an island with 1 car and 4 kids each for 6 weeks. Each kid plays 2 sports and either takes music or dance classes, and there is no access to fast food. Each man must take care of his 4 kids, keep his assigned house clean, correct all the homework, complete science projects, cook, do laundry, etc. The men only have access to television when the kids are asleep and their chores are done. There is only 1 TV between them, and there is no remote. The men must shave their legs and wear makeup daily, which they must apply themselves either while driving or making 4 lunches. They must attend weekly PTA meetings, clean up after their sick children at 3 a.m., make an Indian hut with model clay and 6 toothpaste or tortilla and 1 marker, and get a 4-year-old to eat a serving of peas. The kids will vote them off the island based on performance. The last man wins only if he has enough energy to be intimate with his spouse at a moment's notice. If the last man... Sorry, okay, I know this is church. I apologize in advance for it, okay? If the last man does win, he can play the game over and over again for the next 18 to 25 years, eventually earning the right to be called mother. Happy Mother's Day. Okay, so I'm trying to tell you that I recognize that being a mom is a tough job. But somebody got to do it, right? God chose you. Go at it, right? Tough jobs. All right, Elijah's story. Okay, Elijah is an illustration of a man. I know he's a man. He's a person. He's a follower of God that has a tough job too. Just like moms, right? And the challenge of it, right? The task itself comes to Elijah from God. All right, moms. You're in that role. You're in that place. It'll help you if you come to that same thing like Elijah. We recognize in Elijah's experience is that your work, the responsibilities you carry have been given you by God. God gives Elijah his next task. We come to the story in 1 Kings chapter 18, right? And it tells us this. It says, after a long time, in the 3rd year, the word of the Lord came to Elijah. It says, "Go and present yourself to Ahab, and I will send rain on the land." So Elijah went to present himself to Ahab. Okay, kind of set aside moms for a second. We'll go kind of back and forth between moms and Ahab's. Ahab has been hunting for Elijah for 3 years. Elijah had come to King Ahab and told him there was going to be no rain on the land except at his word. And now finally, after this long wait, Elijah's task of waiting is complete, and now he's supposed to go. He's supposed to go, and God promises rain, that the rain will come. I think Elijah had been waiting for this release to go say, okay, that's long enough. That period of time is an interesting period of time. It seems like God had been weighing the pain of his people against the opportunity for them to respond. And as long as the opportunity for them to respond, as long as there was a sense in which there was hope in their hearts to recognize what was going on, God tarried until finally the opportunity and the days of opportunity were over, and now the time of confrontation has come. You and I aren't going to get to the confrontation this morning. We're just going to talk about this moment where Elijah embraces his task. But that rain is an interesting image for us this morning. I want you to just think about it as a source of refreshing, of a renewal for God's work on the land. Elijah's going, God promises, ultimately will result in the rain coming. I just want that sense of that obedience connected with the promise of refreshment, of the filling up of the reservoirs in the dry places of your heart to sink in. God gives Elijah his next text, and Elijah knows what he's supposed to do. Okay? It comes through clearly to him. Now, so often I come to that bottom line in my heart and life and in my ministry and encouraging other people. I often want to tell people that if you genuinely want to do what God has for you to do, He's going to be faithful to let you know what that is. You come to Him with an honestly open heart. And you have a kind of a posture of obedience. Then God, faithful. He's going to tell you what that next step is for you. And Elijah knows that. He knows his next task. He knows that it's time for him to go and find King Ahab. Remember that Elijah is hiding for good reason. And now he's supposed to go find that king that wanted to kill him, that's been seeking to kill him. And yet he knows that's what he's supposed to do. So I often think that the tasks in life aren't so much a mystery as they are a calling. Okay? Where you are, especially in regards to your family, is a position of trust. Moms, you're in a place, in a role in your family that is a God-given place. And the care and raising of your children is God-given work. God has designed you for that place in the family where He has put you. You ought to receive it from Him. You ought to see it as a service of Him. It's a God-given task, God-given work. And in the responsibility that He's given, there's God's promise to help. In the sense that He says, go into that family, is the promise that He'll send the needed rain for you. Think of the other commands that come to us in Scripture. Maybe the biggest command that applies to all of us is perhaps that last command of Christ, where He tells us to go and make disciples of all nations. And certainly that command jumps out on us, so we're all supposed to be part of this going task, right? Wherever you go, as you go. But we forget that before that is this promise of His authority, right? He says, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore, go. And He follows it up with a sense of dependence on his presence to help. He says, and surely I am with you always to the very end of the age. God's commands always come with this sense, right? They come with a sense of his authority. What God tells you to do, you can do. And what he sends you to do, he provides for you to be able to do them. He not only gives you the command, the go, but he gives you, well, what we're calling kind of the rain that makes it possible. God gives Elijah his next task. Elijah, he goes. He heads out on this task. We don't have any more information than that. Maybe he had more direction. We don't know. But in his obedience, in his responsiveness, Elijah demonstrates that he expects God to help. For you and I, for moms, that's an important step. Expect God to help. As you give and give and give, and as you care and care and care, expect the reality of God's continuing work to pour that rain into your hearts and lives. Expect that you can depend on Him as you listen to Him, as you respond to kind of His priorities for your heart and life. No bigger description of what it takes to be an effective and impactful mother than, well, the description of the fruit of the Spirit. That fruit that the Lord's reality in us creates this kind of character that comes and reflects the character of Christ. Let's listen to this as a description of what it takes to be a mom that honors God's work, that is knowing what He's supposed to do and trust God to help. How about this? But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, forbearance, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. What if that really is the job description that it takes to be a mom? We got to know that fruit doesn't come from your own determination, not a result of careful planning, of a detailed schedule, of even a clear discipline. It comes from a heart that's connected to God through His Spirit, that drinks in His rain, that lives out His life. It's the fruit of what He wants to produce. It's His help. It's His life that makes it possible. So God gives Elijah his next task. God has prepared another person to help. And it introduces us to this guy named Obadiah. Just amazing. Just think about this. After all this time on the sidelines, Elijah's probably been feeling pretty alone, perhaps even forgotten. The wait has at times been long and painful. But while Elijah has been kind of set off, he's even out of the nation, he's kind of put in a small town under the careful care of a widow. In that home with the widow's son also, God's been at work preparing someone else. Another man that we meet only here, that we see just in these few moments, his name is Obadiah. We're given just what sounds like a bit of backstory to this period of time that Elijah's been away, and God has been working in another man's circumstance. So just read just a few of those verses that describes this backstory. It says, "Now the famine was severe in Samaria, and Ahab had summoned Obadiah, his palace administrator." Now the backstory. Obadiah was a devout believer in the Lord. And while Jezebel was killing off the Lord's prophets, Obadiah had taken 100 prophets and hidden them in 2 caves, 50 in each, and had supplied them with food and water. And Ahab said to Obadiah, "Go through the land to all the springs and valleys. Maybe we can find some grass to keep the horses and mules alive so we'll not have to kill any of our animals." So they divided the land, and they were to cover, Ahab going in one direction and Obadiah in the other, as that paragraph should continue to read. Let's just talk for a minute about this guy, right? This man we meet here, Obadiah, it tells us several things about him, and some things we can summarize. One is that Obadiah was a trusted servant of King Ahab, right? And you just ponder that for a moment. Here is this guy. he's serving this king. A couple of chapters ago, the writer of 1 Kings gave us some clues into Ahab, this king Ahab, where it says this: Ahab, son of Omri, did more evil in the eyes of the Lord than any of those before him. Wow. He began to serve Baal and worship him, and Ahab made an Asherah pole and did more to arouse the anger of the Lord, the God of Israel, than did all the kings of Israel. That's a pretty big indictment, right? He's like the worst of the worst. And that's the king that Obadiah served. He was a devout believer in the Lord, and he is serving in Ahab's administration. Wait a minute. I wonder who had the more difficult assignment. Was it Elijah, who is off hiding in this little village called Zarephath near Sidon, clear out of the country, depending on a widow to give her last measure of bread and oil, and trusting that the next day there's going to be enough for that next day? Or is it Obadiah, right, who lives in probably one of the fancier homes in the nation? And if anybody has enough to eat, he does. He's one of the kings, he's at the top of the heap. But he's serving a wicked king. If you had to choose, that'd be a tough choice, wouldn't it? To pick one of those two places. But both of them, right? Both Elijah and Obadiah are serving in the place where God had given them responsibilities. Moms, your responsibilities in your home could look very different than someone else that you look to as an example. Even when you look to your own parents, your responsibilities are different. They are uniquely yours. Just like Elijah had his role and Obadiah has his role. The reality is that serving God looks different in each one of our lives. So Obadiah was a trusted servant of King Ahab and was in a very influential role. It calls him a palace administrator. Sometimes even when different kings are listed in Scripture, it tells us who their palace administrators were. Those are such influential people. We know, for instance, who David's palace administrator was. So it's a very, affluent and influential position. And he demonstrates that role and the trust that Ahab had in him was demonstrated when Ahab and Obadiah split kind of a crucial task. Remember, there had been a famine going on in the land for years, and not a famine, a drought in the land. I'm sure it led to famine, and no rain, no dew. Slowly, the streams and the wells began to dry up. The places that they had gone to sustain their animals became fewer and fewer, and finally, Ahab was left with a choice. He could either kill all of his animals, or he could find a source of, water for them. So for that vital task, he turns to his trusted servant, Obadiah. And he says, I'll do half of the work. You do the other half. That's a sign of trust. Obadiah, trusted servant of King Ahab. It's interesting, isn't it, how God has his trusted service in some of these really secular places. I just think of those today that are trying to serve God, and they're in the Congress, or they're in the House of Representatives. They're sitting in our state capitol building as elected officials or as people part of the administrations, right? Those can be really, really tough places to serve the Lord, and we ought to be praying for those servants within our government that are seeking to not only be faithful servants in those responsibilities, but also faithful servants of God. Obadiah was a faithful servant of God. It tells us that while Jezebel was killing off the Lord's prophets, Obadiah had taken 100 of the prophets and hidden them in 2 caves, 50 in each, and had supplied them with food and water. He risks his life to defy the queen. And You didn't want to get on the wrong side of Queen Jezebel. He uses his own resources to supply them, right? He supplies them with food and water, which had to be an extra challenge given the state of the country at that time. So he undertakes for his own responsibility what God had done by, the ravens and the brook and the widow for Elijah. He's finding himself in a giving posture. When you give and give and give as a mother in the home, sometimes that can become really, really wearing. It can become so difficult to be like Obadiah, right? To recognize that you're giving so much that it can sometimes hurt. For Obadiah, he took that step. He made that commitment. And God was preparing him to play this part in Elijah's story. He was testing his heart. He was inviting him into his plan, all of those pieces. We have lots of examples in the Old Testament of people who played those key roles in secular jobs, right? That's what Daniel was doing when he had all of his visions. He was playing a key role in God's plan, and took him to very high administrative roles within the nation of Egypt. He worked for the good of Egypt, but he was a faithful servant of God. Or Queen Esther, right? Saved the nation, saved the Israelites there in Persia, and led to the exaltation of her uncle Mordecai into really influential position in Persia. Nehemiah, a cupbearer to the king. And in the New Testament, Paul writes about members of Caesar's household that are serving God and Caesar, part of the administration in a really godless time. So it's possible for that to take place, for you to serve God and your responsibilities, not just in the home, but in the wider society. The truth is that, we all need a little help, and Elijah needed help. He didn't really know where that was going to come from. I saw a survey this past week where they surveyed mom and asked them what they needed help with. So those of you that are here and you're here with a mom, pay attention. Where do moms most need help?